like to start with that because it has probably everything from the last 30 years of my bass playing all thrown into one song. If you're brand new to playing bass, I don't recommend you start with that song. Start with something simple and easy. When I was growing up, learning how to play the bass, I got a book. I don't know if you have instruction book, like books like this over here, from a guy named Mel Bay, and it was like Bass Volume 1, you know, and it just taught me how to just, you know, learn how to play scales, right? Real simple, boring things, you know. But it taught me how to, you know, play both major and minor, you know, simple things. And also things like being able to keep my hand, you know, my thumb in the back, you know, kind of like this, rather than like that, right? Kind of keep my hand back there. And even today for this clinic, I raised my strap up a little bit so I could play a little better. All through the night, even at the Megadeth show, I'm adjusting my strap length for various songs, you know. Some of them, I can drop them down a little bit and they feel a little better to play. But obviously something like, like Holy Wars, you know, I pull it up a little bit so that I can keep my hand back there like that. Other things too, you know, I learned how to play initially with fingers, right? There we go. But I found in playing rock and roll, the pick, you know, the plectrum has a, you know what I mean? It's got a sound that cuts through. And when I was much younger, I couldn't afford big rock and roll amps, so the pick was how I cut through the guitars, you know. But one thing that I did learn as I was learning how to play, you know, playing with fingers, is to play evenly, even if you play with two fingers. Right, to play across the neck, and also underneath your fingers, figure 4 fingers, 4 strings, 4 frets. That's a lot of notes, right? So you basically have, you know, 16 notes right underneath your hand. So then as you move your hand up, there's another 16 notes, right? So I realized that playing the bass wasn't so much about up and down, but as opposed to going across the neck. And that allowed me to play much faster and quicker and have a lot more notes at my disposal. And the other thing is too is, you know, the right hand, or your picking or plucking hand, is very important to your sound as a bass player. You know, we spend a lot of time on the neck and doing fancy things because they're more impressive, right? And people, oh, they're fantastic, you know. But the truth of it is as a bass player, you know, our job, especially in heavy metal and in a heavy metal band, you know, the bass, we were talking earlier, I think, about the bass being heard, especially in Megadeth, maybe more so than a lot of other metal bands. Certainly Iron Maiden, you know, bass was up front, because there's a bit of a different approach to it. And in Megadeth, you know, our songs are composed with guitar and drums, and then I feel like they're like building blocks, and then the bass is sort of like the glue that pulls it together, you know. So one of the things that I do with that when I approach that is the feel of something. You know, you understand the word groove, right? You know, like groove, right? You know, something kind of feels good, right? And you can tell groove because when the groove is happening, everybody's heads are like, right? And it looks good, and you're like, yeah, you know, it feels good. And so one of the things that I've learned over the years is to feel things not in quarter and eighth notes or 16th notes, but in halftime. Even like Holy Wars. When I'm playing that, even though we're ripping and thrashing, inside me, I'm going. I'm not going dig it, dig it, dig it. I'm going. Right? So, and so inside, I'm kind of more listening to like Sean's snare drum, you know, right? And so inside it pulls the groove back so that it really feels good. Even though we're playing a lot of notes and the tempo is very fast, inside it's kind of like a drummer. You know, the hi-hat plays the 16th notes, the kick drum, usually the quarter notes on the one, on the downbeat, and the snare is kind of, drummers are always subdividing a phrase, right? So I kind of think like that as a bass player. So I want to play something for you, and I'll try to nod my head a little bit since it's a little harder to talk and play on this one, but just to kind of show you where, when I'm kind of feeling it, where it sort of has this thing, but then also then pulling it back, and to just kind of show you the difference of the feel. So as a player, again, if you're going home and practicing and stuff, that you start to you know, can maybe use these things a little bit to help develop your feel and your groove a little bit. Let me see, where is it? Now I'll pull it back to the halftime. Interesting. Even as I started playing it, I realized I was kind of ahead of the beat, you know. And what happens with that is you tend to speed up, right? Because as you get excited, right, you speed up. And has anybody ever been in the studio or recorded themselves, right? The first thing you realize when you record yourself is how much you suck, right? Right? You're not very good, right? And that's one of the first things I discovered was timing. Right? Is that all of a sudden it's like, whoa, my timing's not good, you know? And bands, if you're in a band with your buddies, and unless one guy's timing is really good, it's easier for our timing to get worse rather than better. So we really have to try and pay attention to it. And, you know, having like a metronome or a drum machine is, I try to play with a metronome or a drum machine as often as I can, even on my little, you know, on my iPhone here, or my iTouch thing, I have an app, a metronome app, so I can even sit in my hotel room. And sometimes I just turn it on. Is it, you know, and after I hear that for a while, because I'm brushing my teeth or shaving or whatever, right? All of a sudden, it's like I'm kind of like thinking about time a little better, you know, and I'm a little more kind of locked in. So when I go to the show and we sound check, all of a sudden, fortunately, Sean Drover has very good time, immaculate, very, very good, and he's really made playing Rust in Peace and, you know, what might become Peace L's now, and all these, you know, old songs. They feel really good and they're really easy to play because of the time is so good on them, you know. But for me, as a bass player, I have the responsibility to make sure you know, just kind of make sure my time is really feeling good, you know, and to make sure that I'm not pushing or pulling. So, all right, so we talked a little bit about learning to play notes. Other thing about that, making sure things are even. You know, one finger, second finger, and then, right, making sure that they're very even. Then if you use a pick, you know, or so that it's really even at all times, you know what I mean? So you're not going, you don't want that, right? You want nice and even. So that way, again, time is really, really good. I also learned, too, to play up on the tips of the finger. You know, not, again, instead of doing that, which is now you're using all this fat part of the skin of the finger, but rather to get up on the tip. So very little skin is really touching the finger. And that's what I think, you know, as over the years I've developed kind of a sharp, very pointed sound, you know. And it's too easy, too, to sometimes overthrow the fret. You know, you don't want that. You want very clean, you know. Right? That way it's nice and clean, and, you know, from my ear, I always heard it being very precise. So, another thing I want to show real quick is You know, usually the bass is, we play one note at a time. But I want to do something where sometimes we play, you know, chords, right? And just playing, usually in a scale, like the 1 and the 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Sometimes that can make a nice dynamic. Like even in Poison Was the Cure, for instance. Right? And it's kind of a nice way to put a little punch on the end of those. And I only do it at the end of the song, but it's a nice way to be able to do that. And at the end, I'll play another song that has some, you know, again, kind of that same kind of chord, a 1 and a 5. So it's just a way for the bass to be able to do a little more than just always, you know, play one note all the time. And also for arpeggios, right? An arpeggio is just taking a chord and splitting out, choosing single notes within that. So I usually don't play with any effects on my rig. I usually just kind of plug straight in, just kind of what you see right here, really. My Jackson bass into the Hartke amp, done, right? But occasionally I'll use a Digitech. I don't know if you have any effects here, but Digitech makes a stereo chorus pedal. And that, I don't have it here with me, but it like tonight, if we played, say, Poison Was the Cure, right? You know what I mean? It just kind of adds a nice thing. And even like Dawn Patrol, when the bass is sitting out front as a solo instrument, it just kind of adds a nice little bit of flavor to it. So I'm going to play a couple little pieces here to demonstrate a little bit about how to think, even as you're writing a song, about where, because sometimes I'll come up with a bass line and I'll put guitars and drums around it rather than coming up with the guitars and drums and putting the bass into it, right? It's just a different way to think about it, to be able to create something from the bass player. Because it's easy to get frustrated as a bass player, come up with something, then you show it to the band, they're like, eh, whatever, right? We don't need that, right? So there's different ways I found that are different approaches to be able to bring things in that are exciting, and they sound a little different, and it's just a different, you know, using the instrument as a way to compose rather than just only being a supporting instrument. So.